Good morning. Good morning. Happy fall. It's really gotten here, whatever the calendar may say, and it's nice. My name is David Howell, and my pronouns are he and him, and I am your worship associate for this morning. We say all the time that we are an inclusive group, and that's partly to say that we are not exclusive. I was thinking, as I was thinking about this morning, what binds us together. And what binds us together is wanting to be a force in the world, not because we demand that others are like us, but that we will join and welcome and want to be with whoever it is that wants to be a force for kindness and acceptance and generosity and action in the world. And welcome, of course, to all the people who are here virtually. There are lots of announcements in there. There are two that I do want to say something more about. The first is next Saturday, our fall get-together other at Cove Lake. Many of you know that for years and years and years we have done a weekend. This year we're just doing one day at Cove Lake, in which we'll be walking and eating together and doing those things that we do together. The only specific thing that has a time on it is that Yetta and I will be leading a bird watching walk starting about 9 o'clock, which means I have to get up in time to get there for that. But 9 o'clock is as late as you could do it and still be able to see some birds. So anybody who wants to walk around, Cove Lake is a very pretty area if you haven't been there, and nice places to look at birds. So we'll be taking off about 9, and then things will be going on all day long.
Where are you meeting at 9?
So, Yetta, where are you? There you are.
We have, what picnic pavilion do we have, Ann?
I believe it's,
Is it number 4?
yeah, I think it's 4.
Yeah, we will post, tell them we will post the picnic pavilion to meet at, but we do have a pavilion. We believe it's number 4.
Okay, picnic pavilion, we believe, is number 4.
And do we want to get RSVP? Do we know if people will be there?
Pardon?
Do we want RSVP?
Do you want RSVP?
I don't think so. Whoever shows up, and at 9 o'clock, we will start moving, probably pretty slowly.
But we will be there at picnic pavilion. We'll be there at the same picnic pavilion all day.
Yes. The only other thing I wanted to mention is the auction, which is not now for another month, but as it says in here, start thinking about what you might bring. One man's, one woman's, one person's trash is another person's treasure. I remember a couple years ago, I was cleaning out my house and I contributed lots of stuff. Everyone has things that they are done with, and share them with someone else, for we are a sharing community. Yes, Suzanne.
And don't forget, regarding the auction, don't forget how popular dinners are to host, and then people will bid and say, oh yes, I want to bid like this. And if you by any chance have vacation property somewhere and are willing to donate a week, that is very popular. So think in terms of intangibles as well as tangibles. We want lots of everything. This is one of the ways we support the church.
Any other comments, announcements that anyone needs to make?
Suzanne, are you the coordinator? I didn't hear the question. Coordinator. I guess I'm a coordinator. Oh, you are.
David, go ahead and announce that Ann is the
Okay.
auction coordinator.
Okay, loudly from the microphone, Ann is the official coordinator.
And Yetta has something.
Yes, Yetta.
So another thing we've talked about doing for the auction, I think it's still on the table, is a talent show. So think about what you might want to do. It could be a no talent show.
Yes.
We're a very forgiving audience, so if you want to do a little skit or something like that, we'll have a sign-up sheet for maybe 2 weeks.
And repeat that for the virtual folks.
Yes, and to repeat for the virtual people, there is going to be a talent show at the auction, and so think about what you might do that we all might enjoy. We are an accepting group, and we can find ways that you will be appreciated that you might not have guessed, and that's surely a win-win situation. Anything else? Well, then it is time to move and shift into a different mood.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to see you all. Welcome to everyone who's with us virtually. If I haven't met you yet, I am Reverend Carol Bedeau. I am privileged to serve here as minister, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. So please do consider coming to our one-day retreat this weekend. We are going to be going back to trying to find some place for a full weekend for next year. So if anybody has we have been trying to figure this out for a long time. If you have any great ideas for places where we could spend 3 days, 2-3 days together on the land, that would be great. Before we invite our bowl to sound this morning, we are going to take a moment to honor the ancestors and the people who have cared for the land. Westside is a community that cares very much about the land and the earth and being good stewards of it. And, we see that in our Green Sanctuary movement. We see that in our Earth Church movement. We see that in all the hikes and outdoor activities that happen through our auction. We're a community of people that care very much about the land. Today we're going to be talking about Indigenous people, particularly the Indigenous people who have, for many centuries, stewarded the land of this part of the country. And so we're going to take a moment this morning, as we sometimes do, to do what's called a land dedication or remembrance. And this is a way of naming the people who used to live here, who are not right on this physical space anymore. We gather today on the traditional lands of many Indigenous people, the Yuchi, the Creek, the Chickasaw, the Choctaw, and the more commonly recognized Cherokee people. Today we will be learning about this last group, the Cherokee, who originally called themselves Aniuiya. Aniuiya, the principal people. The word Cherokee is an anglicization of their own word, Juluji. Juluji, Cherokee, which is how many people in the community now identify themselves as Juluji. We acknowledge that Indigenous people were the original inhabitants of the lands where we live and where we worship, and that the legacies of settler colonialism still echo through our economies, our theologies, and our policies, continuing to impact the original stewards of this beautiful place in harmful ways. As part of our commitment to caring for the communities in which we exist, we dedicate ourselves to learning more about our Indigenous neighbors and shaping our own actions in accordance with the values of honoring diversity, caring for the earth, and acting for justice and equity. So as I invite the bowl to sound this morning, I invite you to reflect for just a moment on your own relationship to the Indigenous peoples that are our neighbors and that cared for this land for so long before we were allowed, through sometimes not so gentle means, to find ourselves here today. So let the bowl call us back into relationship with the Indigenous communities that are so essential to our relationship to the land.
While Reverend Carol lights the chalice, I have a poem called Wild Geese by Mary Oliver. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert, repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clean pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscape. Over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over announcing your place in the family of things. While I found this poem, there was another short poem quote from Mary Oliver. Rules for leading a good life. Pay attention. Be astonished. Tell about it.
So today we're going to be thinking about stewarding the land through the lens of the communities that have stewarded this land, Eastern Tennessee, the Great Smoky Mountain area. And we're going to begin with a brief history of our denomination's interactions with Indigenous people. This will be the less fun part of the morning's conversation. So here's some history of our denomination's interaction with Indigenous people. In November of 1620, the earliest ancestors of our Unitarian tradition, so this is the ancestors, direct ancestors of Unitarianism, landed on the shores of what is now called Cape Cod. Those people were often called the Pilgrims in conventional history. And this group settled in an abandoned native village which had been wiped out by European diseases. Eventually, these people were called Congregationalists by their neighbors of other religions. These first Unitarian Universalists interacted in complex ways with the native inhabitants of the land they sought to settle. Fast forward 150 years from that time. In 1787, the Society for the Propagation of the Gospel Among the Indians and Others was founded. Its goal, the goal of this organization, which was a very widespread, very powerful organization for a long time, its goal was, quote, the dissemination of Christian knowledge and the means of religious instruction among all those in their country who were destitute of them. In other words, and this is another quote, the goal was to civilize and Christianize Native Americans as well as economically disadvantaged whites. For over a century, this organization had a lot of Unitarians involved in it. It was largely fueled by Unitarians and other liberal religious thinkers. Now, meanwhile, so you've got the Society for the Propagation of the Gospel going on from the late 1700s well through all of the 19th century. Meanwhile, here in the Smoky Mountain region, the Julaji people were being subjected to the Indian Removal Act, which was something that happened in the 1830s under Andrew Jackson. And most local Native people were removed to the west, primarily to the Oklahoma Territory. This divided the Cherokee tribe into subgroups, which identify today by their location. So if you say the word Cherokee, that refers to 3 different tribal groups who now self-identify as 3 separate groups with relationships but different. The Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma, the United Kituwa Band of Cherokee Indians, which also happens to be in Oklahoma, and the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, which is the community that is here in North Carolina. This last group is also known as the Qualla Band, and it's made up of descendants of people who remained in North Carolina at the time of removal, which is also referred to as the Trail of Tears. And the way that they were able to remain was there was some land purchase that allowed, and there were also a number of people who hid in the hills and simply were able to escape removal. So that's 1830s, 1840s. In 1870s, President Ulysses S. Grant invited Protestant denominations to take over the management of American Indian reservations and agencies. So the government said, you churches come on and help us out run these Indian agencies. He hoped that that would cut down on government corruption in the agencies while simultaneously helping to civilize the Indians. Now, the American Unitarian Association accepted that charge, and they took control of the district covering the Colorado Reservation occupied by various tribes of the Ute. This was about 8,000 people. So they eventually moved that mission to Montana and established the Montana Industrial School for Indians. So when you hear about the boarding school movement and how horrible the boarding schools were, the Unitarians ran a boarding school. So we need to know that. That's part of our history. In 1909, President Taft appointed the head of the Unitarian Association, Samuel Atkins Elliott, to the Board of Indian Commissioners. So the head of our denomination was on the board for Indian management. And in that capacity, the president of Unitarianism gave many addresses. One of his speeches was called "From the Scalping Knife to the Can Opener." It's horrifying, isn't it? Yeah. And he argued how only assimilation to white culture would save Native Americans from their own barbarism. Eliot believed that liberal Christianity was an appropriate vehicle for teaching Native character. And this is a direct quote from the president of the Unitarian Association in the early 1900s. He, the Indian, must first be trained to strength of will and steadiness of purpose. He must become accustomed to participate in the life of a community which acts under moral ideas, with the implication being that Native people didn't already have communities acting under moral ideas, which is sort of horrifying. What I wrote in the margin of my notes as I was writing this was, ouch. Ouch. We don't talk about that very much. That's part of our legacy. We think of ourselves as liberal people, and so we think that we are handling these things well. But the truth is, in the 19th and early 20th century, our liberal idea was that the best thing we could do was civilize the Indians. This explains why, starting later in the 20th century, in the 1970s, our General Assembly of our denomination started calling for some better behavior on our part relating to Native and Indigenous peoples. So there have been a number of resolutions and initiatives and actions since then. You can look at one of the best places to look at this timeline is Harvard Square Library's timeline of Unitarian Universalist relations with Native American peoples and nations. That's a lot of words. We can put that on our website. But Harvard Square Library has a wonderful timeline of UU interactions with Native peoples. And there have been a number of different resolutions of the General Assembly. One of them was called Reconsidering Thanksgiving. So just bear this in mind as the season is approaching. And it's also this impulse towards being better about such things is echoed in the revised statement of our principles and purpose, which is, we've talked about this Article 2 revision. It's in the justice section of our revised principles and purposes. We work to be diverse, multicultural, beloved communities where all thrive. We covenant to dismantle racism and all forms of systemic oppression. The first step to addressing systemic racism and oppression is education, is being aware, is learning about things. How many of us ever think about the fact that Unitarians ran an Indian boarding school? That's not something we think about. We have to educate ourselves. We have to become aware. That's only the first step. I want to be really clear about that. That's step one. It's not all the steps. That's just the first step. But it is important. So last weekend, some of you participated in what we called a Living Our Values field trip. A group of 35 people from 3 of our local congregations went to Cherokee, North Carolina, to visit some of the institutions that are run by the Qualla Band of the Eastern Cherokee. We gathered at the what's now called the Oconaluftee Indian Village, named by the tribe that, where the tribe presents a living history of multiple centuries of Cherokee life. We got to learn about the traditional plants used by the community for food and healing and building construction and materials making. And we actually, many of us walked along a forest trail where the community has all these species that they use for different purposes marked with educational signs. Now, one of the benefits of that, it's not just learning about the specific plants, but it's getting a feeling for walking through those woods as an inhabitant rather than a tourist. So when you walk through those cool woods and pay attention to the uses of the environment, when you stop and say, oh my gosh, this tree can be used for tea or medicine, or it just shifts your perspective a little bit. Even I had a better sense of what it might be like to live embedded in the environment rather than just visiting it. Too often, when we don't live embedded in nature, we tend to be a little bit of tourists there. In the village, our tour guide, who was incredibly educated about the community's history, the tour guide gave an incredibly detailed list of facts and figures and also reflections on the lifeways of her people, who are traditionally matrilineal, which means that lineage and land and the identity of people in the tribe is based on the clan of the mother, not of the father. So, for example, one of the things that she talked about was how in the community, if a woman decided that her husband was no longer serving the needs of her family, all she had to do was put his belongings outside the lodge, and he knew he needed to go back to his mother's house. Also, she described how in the raising of children in the community, and this is in more traditional times, although I don't know to what, she did not speak to how the matrilineal patterns are still part of the community. But in traditional times, that also meant that when a child was being raised, the mother's brothers were actually more important in the raising of the child than the father, because the clan line is the mother's line. So there's these interesting connections to clan. A matrilineal society is something most of us don't even think about. We saw some of the tools they used. We learned about their beliefs about land ownership and polity and war. And what I thought was really interesting was the way that art and practicality were intertwined in the crafts. For example, in the beadwork and the basket making. At the dance grounds, a number of young adults shared traditional dances that showed just how tied these two things, artistry and practicality, are to a third thing, which is spirituality. We got to see a number of fairly hilarious, actually, dances that are imitations of animals that were fun to watch, but also give you a clear sense of how deeply connected to nature the people are. The relationship between the people and their natural environment is at the center of their spiritual practice. I'd like to invite you for a moment to contrast the idea of a bird dance or a snake dance with the idea of twerking. How we dance tells us something about our society. It tells us something about our values, right? It's different. There's some other fantastic dances that we do in our society that tell us a lot about what we value. One of the dances that gets the most laughter from the crowd is the dance of the bison, right? So it's couples, they're paired in groups of two, pretending to be bison, looking for things, and then fighting, and then looking, and then fighting. And it was actually very entertaining. But how many of you knew, raise your hand, if you knew that, in fact, there used to be bison here? I didn't know that. That's the thing I didn't know. I didn't have a clue. It was a smaller variety of bison than the western bison, but bison were something that were part of our ecosystem. And the reason that they are gone is that they were driven to extinction here through the fur trade, because when white settlers came, the fur trade was such an important thing. Now, in both the dance grounds and in the council house, we learned about the 7 traditional clans of the people and their roles in society. Different groups might have slightly different emphases in these clans, and they might have a slightly different way to name them. So and there are some sub-clans in these clans, but these are the basics. The 7 clans are the Longhairs, which were generally peacekeepers and peace chiefs. The Wild Potato Clan, who were agrarian. The clans still exist. They don't necessarily have these traditional roles anymore. The Wild Potato Clan, which did a lot of the farming and the agrarian work. The Bird Clan, who were messengers. The Deer Clan, who were hunters and tended to animals. The Wolf Clan, primarily warriors and protectors. The Blue Clan, who made medicine from a blue plant. That's where the origin of that is. And the Paint Clan, who were healers. And again, these larger clan names also have sub-clans that particular villages would have as prominent. Now, after our tour, many of us had lunch on the bank of the Oconaluftee River, which runs through the town. And I learned something really interesting about that name. The name Oconaluftee is actually derived from the name of the village, the original name of the village, which was on the bank of the river. Now, the spelling of that name, you'd look at it and an English-speaking person would think it's Egwanulti. But the pronunciation is probably something closer to Egwanulti, which sounds like Oconaluftee. The name Oconaluftee, that translation of it, which Egwanulti, it's hard to pronounce, means by the river. They were given the name Oconaluftee by a white English colonial explorer named John Bartram, who came through in the 18th century. Some of you will have seen Bartram's, he's very famous for his paintings of birds and plants. He's considered one of the first botanists to have traveled through the area, and he made sketches and drawings and paintings of the area, and he's the one who came up with the translation Oconaluftee. Okay? Now, there wasn't time for many of us to see everything we wanted to see. Our original objective was to see the things that are controlled by the tribal community there and businesses that are owned or supported by Native people. So we wanted to see the village. Everyone got to the village. We also wanted to see the Museum of the Cherokee Indian, bookstores run by Native people, the arts and crafts, the Koala Arts and Crafts Collective, which is near the museum. There are a number of other businesses in town. And there's also an area outside of town which some people were able to visit, which I do not know the Cherokee pronunciation of this. It looks like it's pronounced Kitua, but I am not sure how they would pronounce it. And it is, they call it the Mother Village. It's the site of the original village where the community was established at the time of contact. I didn't get to see all those things. We were separated into separate cars, but my carload did see one thing that you will almost always see if you go to Cherokee. We saw a young man on Main Street dressed in the traditional regalia of the Plains Indians tribes, getting his picture taken with tourists near a statue of a bison, which is not Cherokee at all. This is an image that tourists, non-native tourists, have of Indian people. The idea of the war chief with the big headdress of feathers, That's not a Cherokee thing. And yet, if you go through Cherokee, you will almost always see someone in a Plains regalia on Main Street near the bison statue getting their picture taken by the tourists. So once when I was in Cherokee with friends, and then we went to the village, I asked one of the interpreters, one of the tribal members in the village about that. I said, you know, I saw this guy on Main Street wearing Plains regalia, and I said, how do you feel about that? Like, what do you think about that? And the young man, who was actually wearing traditional Cherokee attire and teaching people about the culture, said this. He said, "Oh, chiefing?" And that's what it's called. When a Native person dresses up as an Indian, the way white people expect Indians to look, Native people call it chiefing. He said, "Oh, chiefing? People have to feed their families." So that's important for us to understand. And that is partly why we took the trip this last weekend. Because given our own history as the descendants of those pilgrims and the ones who participated in the Society for the Propagation of the Gospel among the Indians, and as the denomination that was led only 100 years ago by Samuel Atkins Eliot, and the ones who ran the boarding school, as those people, we have a moral imperative to educate ourselves. So I would encourage you to visit Cherokee, North Carolina, and to prioritize going to the places run by the tribe for the benefit of the tribe. You might want to learn more about a new program that they are developing and trying to grow, which is a language immersion school for children. The language is sort of dying out as the elders die out, and they're trying to revive it by making sure that the children have the opportunity to be educated in the traditional language. I think they said that now they have that available through 7th or 8th grade. They're trying to extend that. The children go into the school, and when they're at school, they only speak Cherokee, which means that the parents have to commit to learning the language as well, so that when the kids are at home, they can practice speaking the native language. You might support Native artists in their incredible work, and I want to say, yes, their baskets are in fact worth that much money. I can't tell you how many times I've heard people say, and I've had the thought myself, that basket can't possibly be worth that much money. But when you hear someone describe that it took 3 months of work to make a basket by hand that was not made on a machine, but was made by hand with traditional dyes, and they devoted 3 months of their life to it, it is indeed worth 3 months of income to buy the basket. You might want to hear elders speaking about their history in the museum, or simply just appreciate a lifeway that is close to the land by walking through a garden. We as UUs have incredibly powerful values, and one way we can live them is by getting out and getting to know our neighbors. So, we are looking for more ideas for ways to do living our values field trips. There are some that are further away, some that are closer to home. And I would invite you to think about things that we might go learn about, ways we might gather together and go learn about things. So, let us live our values as much as we can. Let us appreciate the land, and let us appreciate the people who stewarded it for us. In a minute, we're going to take some time to acknowledge our own community and the needs and values of our community by sharing joys and concerns. So if you are with us virtually, I want to invite you to maybe put those in the chat. We'll be checking those out. Each week, we take a moment to acknowledge all the opportunities that we have to live our values. Now, one way you can do that is absolutely to support this institution financially. We have stopped, as you may know, passing the plate during the service. If you are here with us in person, there is a box at the back of the room that you can drop a donation into, either before the service or during coffee hour. You can also use the QR code on that box to make a donation. If you do that with that QR code. It will be included in our Share the Plate contributions, our quarterly Share the Plate contributions. And I'm going to ask Jerry and Alice, can you tell us the name of the Share the Plate partner this month? Who's the Sierra Club group?
Inspiring Connections Outdoors. It's a program for disadvantaged youth.
Okay.
Played in the inner city schools and Big Brothers Big Sisters, and the Hamachi program for children who have parents in jail.
Okay, I'm going to try to repeat that. Inspiring Connections Outdoors, which is, it's organized by the Sierra Club, right? Works with children and youth, mostly disadvantaged children and youth, to get them in connection with nature. So we will be making our usual Share the Plate donation. If you make a contribution today, a portion of any undesignated funds will go to that. You also can participate in any of the other Sharing Our Values kinds of projects we're doing. We are taking collections of materials still for some of our programs, and there are all sorts of other ways you can get involved. And another way that we share our values is by sharing our joys and concerns. Sandra's going to play for us for a moment, and then when she's done, after we've had a chance to be quiet and meditate, we're going to be sharing some of our joys and some of our concerns together. We're going to begin our joys and concerns today with a couple of larger joys and concerns. David, I'm going to invite you to light our 2 community candles up here behind the chalice. If you could light those from the candle there by the chalice. We're going to light those 2 candles. The first one for all our Indigenous neighbors. We have a lot of Indigenous neighbors, both traditionally peoples who have been in this area and also new Indigenous communities. Knoxville actually apparently has quite a large Mayan community, people who are descendants of Mayan tribes in the area. We have all kinds of Indigenous peoples who are our neighbors, so let us take just a moment to be aware of their well-being and the displacement that they've experienced as communities. And secondly, we are going to take a moment of silence in solidarity with a number of other UU congregations and also other congregations of other faith traditions. This morning, we are just going to take a moment to honor all those who are suffering from the effects of gun violence. This is something that impacts us all. This is something that we're very aware of. Some of you may be aware that a new plant is open in Maryville now. And this isn't about politics, it's just about acknowledging the suffering of people who have experienced violence, people who've lost family members in whatever way through gun violence. So let's just take a moment to reflect on that. We wish for all beings that they may be well, that they may find peace, and that they may be happy. And now, if you have something that's in your mind or your heart, a joy, a concern, something that's happening in your life that you'd like to share, I invite you to come forward. Just say your name and whatever that joy or concern is briefly. And these are personal things. This isn't so much about politics as it is what's happening for you personally. So your name and a brief statement, and we will light a candle for you. And if you are with us virtually, Chris will be checking out the chat in the YouTube, and you can share those, and we will light a candle for you as well.
I most often do celebrations, but this week, you may have to say, our little kitty started going downhill rapidly, and we buried her on Thursday.
Yeah, we had mentioned that she was our cat last Sunday when she was still, as far as we knew, healthy. So it happened very rapidly.
I'm Judy. Very much on my mind has been my friend Virginia, who I have known for 20 plus years. About the first week of September, she wasn't feeling well, and I had agreed I would take her to a doctor appointment that she had scheduled, a second doctor appointment, because she hadn't gotten better of the first one. And but before I could go pick her up, the man that she shares her life with called and says, "Don't bother to come, I called an ambulance." So she was taken to the hospital, and when I left for a 2-week trip to go visit family, she was in the hospital. I figured by the time I got back she'd be home, because it turned out the diagnosis was she had the flu and COVID. Oh. And so when I did get back and checked in with them, I found out she'd actually had been moved to a nursing home and rehabilitation center. But she's scheduled to come home tomorrow. And I have visited her, and she's acting like herself, so that's good news.
Okay, so I'm Jerry, and this is Alice, and we have a joy and a concern. First, the joy. We mentioned ICO a while ago, our Inspiring Connections Outdoors, and we were actually in Cades Cove yesterday with a number of kids from Big Brothers and Big Sisters and from the Amachi program, and we were tagging monarch butterflies as they migrate south. And we caught a lot of different kinds of butterflies, more than monarchs, actually. And the kids had a great time, and so that's the kind of thing we do, and urge you to support ICO. And then Alice.
I did the first grade.
Oh yeah, on Friday we did a first grade field trip at Dogwood Elementary School too, and we taught the kids about plants, and they were lots of giggles.
and we talked to 5 different classes in about 30 minutes each. So it's a very fun experience. But by the end of the time, the last class are getting a little antsy. So, but it's fun. My sorrow is to remember my favorite cousin's husband who died about a week ago. They live on the eastern shore of Virginia, so it's not an easy trip to go see them, but we hope to see my cousin fairly soon. And so I just want to remember Charlie.
Hi, I'm the other Alice. I just want to have a reach out. I don't know how many of you were at our wedding here so long ago, but Cass Kramer, who gave me away, and his wife Jenny, who was our what do you call it, the mother of the bride, because neither of us had anybody else. But Cass and Jenny have recently lost their eldest daughter and are struggling with that. So my thoughts, and hopefully your thoughts, go out to them to make them stronger right now.
Well, this really isn't about me. It's about Len Walker, who apparently had an altercation with a golf cart and has a dislocated hip.
Yeah, I emailed with Len yesterday some. He said that the golf cart and he went downhill, and he tried to abandon ship before the golf cart crashed, and it ended up running over him. So he's slowly getting better, but he's in a lot of pain. So we are sending him lots of good thoughts. Yeah. Yeah. Any more? I want to light one candle. I have some of you will remember John Pierce, who's been part of this congregation on and off. John and his wife Julie have a new baby, Phoenix, who's a few weeks old. Phoenix had a rough start. He was in the NICU for a few days, and it was a bumpy start, but they are home. I think Phoenix is about 6 weeks, 8 weeks old now, something like that. Anyway, I get to go hold baby Phoenix after church today. So that's a candle of joy for Phoenix and for me. Anything else? I'm going to light one more candle for any joys and concerns we haven't named. As a community, we have the capacity, simply by holding our attention on things, to ease suffering, to spread joy, to live our values simply through meeting each other every single day. So, as our service comes to a close, I invite you to rise and join with us. Now, I told you before, I had this insight. You can hold your own hands. It is okay to hold your own hand. It is okay to love yourself. If you don't want to hold anybody else's hand, hold your own hand. And if you just want to hold the hand of one person nearby, that is fine. But it is really good to hold your own hands, people. You put on your own mask first. It starts there. We are a community that cares. We can't fix everything. We can't do everything. We can't undo history. But we can care, and we can be awake. So let us go into the world being willing to hear stories, being always willing to open our minds to new perspective, to open our hearts to the concerns and celebrations and struggles of those around us, and being willing to do what is in our wheelhouse, not everything, but just what is right in front of us, to show the world that our caring makes a difference. May your week be filled with small moments of joy. May you smile at your neighbors and at your friends and family, and may you receive in return the generosity of caring and a happy smile too. Go in peace, go in passion. Have a beautiful week.